What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the show. Today, joining me is Jason Reposa. He is the founder, CEO at Good Feels, a cannabis-infused beverage. Jason, how you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Jordan.
I'm excited to get into this, and I don't want to waste too much time, so let's get right in. Cannabis-infused beverage, was this like, how did you stumble into the, did you stumble in? Was it always the plan? What led you to say, hey, I want to create this company?
Stumbled is probably the best word for it. I actually started with I actually started because I had a medical issue myself, right? That's like how a lot of people get into cannabis in general, whether they're just consuming it or they're starting a business. And I've heard from a lot of different business owners that have come in through that same way where they just had a medical issue and now they're just like, hey, this stuff actually works. And now you're like, maybe I should make a business out of this. And so as more people kind of realize the benefits, more people are piling on. But yeah, so stumbling into beverages was because I originally started with, the original treatments of an oil like based tincture in my mouth, swirling around, and eventually got some relief a little bit, but you couldn't really tell. Back then we'd call it hot dog water. You don't even know what's in these bottles sometimes, right? So it's just like you don't even know, they say what's on the ingredient list, but who knows what's actually really in it. And so eventually I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so I actually stumbled upon the tinctured version or a concentrated version of a beverage, really like a mix in product, like a Mio, where you can just squirt it into water and then it just infuses THC into your water or any cannabinoids really. And so that's where I started back in like 2019, like late 2019. And then early 2020, I, pandemic hit. And then I was just like, try to take care of my family and stuff like that. But eventually, in my downtime, when I was done finding toilet paper for my family, I eventually decided on like maybe this is a real thing, and so I discovered other people were doing it, but they were doing it in like an RTD, like full finished beverage, and I was like, that's interesting. Like I could do that because at that point I was preparing medicine for me and my mom, really,
Mhm.
because she has rheumatoid arthritis, and so I was trying to relieve her pain and relieve my pain. And eventually I was like, I think I could make a drink. And so I reverse engineered like what it takes to make a drink. Like, how do you carbonate something? And like, what do you contain it in? Now I got to get like a bunch of kegs and stuff like that. And I kind of just reverse engineered the process because that's the way my brain works. But eventually it came and stumbled upon, putting seltzer in a bottle. That was kind of like the big thing. And then at that point, I was kind of like, well, I've already done all this work. I understand it, and nobody's really doing it in the market yet. There were some like West Coast brands that like CANN was out already at that point, but I was like, nobody's doing it in Massachusetts, and it's legal here, so maybe that's my next thing. And I just had recently sold two companies, and so I was like, let's try it.
Cool. That's awesome. You just kind of start to be like, you see it solving your own problem, as many businesses are born out of, and then mixing that with spotting opportunity, timing and market, all of those things to go, oh, am I crazy or is this perfect? And I feel like that's the entrepreneur's battle always, right? Like, is this
Yeah.
guy perfect or what have you? Um,
Well, yeah, actually, that's to raise a good point there. It's because it happens to a lot of startup founders, and to this day, I'm still banging my head against this because it's so obvious what the future looks like to me in my head, and I've known this for literally 2 years now, over 2 years at this point, literally since 2020. Very clearly, what the vision of all this is and what it's going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That getting people on board with it, it has been a struggle now because beverages are just like, well, why would I, blah, blah, blah. And so we have lots of reasons why you'd do it that way, right? But the point being, when you're an entrepreneur, you kind of have to always be like, there's going to be doubters everywhere, right? And you just kind of have to stick to your guns and say, this is no, this we're doing it this way because I can very clearly see a bottle of my, a bottle of my cannabis infused seltzer on a bar in Brooklyn or something like that. It's like very clear as an image in my head of like my old haunts back in Brooklyn to see my product on that bar top. It's going to happen. It's 100% going to happen. But it's like to bring everybody along with you is, everybody's just like, you're crazy or whatever. It's like, doesn't, cannabis is illegal. It's never going to happen. And then, all these other words that come out of people's mouths that are silly.
it's wild. I think that willingness to be misunderstood is like a superpower to kind of be like, okay, I see it. I know what I want. But if my cousins don't, that's okay.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
got to keep going forward and moving forward.
Yeah,
It's,
because
it's
everybody
be,
will throw an excuse at me being like, "Oh, it won't work because of this. It won't work because of this. It won't," legality reasons primarily, like regulatory stuff, like, "Oh, you couldn't, you can't consume on premise with alcohol. Like that's never going to happen." And it's just like, you'll wait and see. It'll happen. It's an intoxicant without a doubt, but at the same time, it's like if you're 21, do you really want to be, kid gloved into like a low dose beverage, meaning like not crazy high THC, but like a couple of milligrams? No, it's like we're all adults here. We can figure out how to consume without getting out of control. At
yeah,
least we hope so.
it's yeah, it's something that's interesting. I always tell people if they come and they ask me like business advice or they get kind of on the defeatist thing, it won't work because of one, two, three. I'm like, okay, we need to spend equal amount of time in the catastrophe zone as we do in the success zone. So for all that hour you spent worrying about what could go wrong, go give me an hour and talk about all the things that could go right and look for other ways for things to go right. And then typically people come back after that and they're like, oh, actually, it turns out maybe we could, we could do this, we could do that. I see some other opportunities. And um, kind of, building on that idea, I know you all are moving into Texas. So
Yep.
I'm really interested to kind of like understand what that entails, right? Texas, obviously anyone listening to this, if they,
It's
have,
illegal.
yeah, it's
It's
illegal.
illegal. Like, why would you even think about doing something
Yeah.
like that? And it seems crazy to most people, right? But again, I have this vision of what it actually looks like. So more recently, and we've been tracking this actually for a while ourselves, and we've known about this for quite a while, but there's a bifurcation in the market, right? There's a separation between two different markets that are considered, air quotes, under the cannabis umbrella. One is the licensed marijuana. It's a derogatory term, but I'll use it in this case to mean something specific like licensed operators in individual states, federally illegal everywhere else. And then the other side of that, which is the hemp regulated market, which is federally legal in all states. Or 49, I think Wyoming is still like being weird about it, or like Idaho maybe is like a little bit weird about hemp still, but for the most part is a federally legal under the Farm Bill of 2018. There's a new one coming out in 2023 that we're all anticipating. It could go either way. It could get tightened, or it could be like a little bit even looser than what it is today. But either way, the like Texas opportunity for us is about accessibility, right? So if we say, hey, we're still a licensed cannabis operator in the Massachusetts market, and we're still going to crush it in Massachusetts, regardless. Like our products are phenomenal. People love us. I get emails once a week telling us how much they love our products. I got a LinkedIn actually message before I jumped on this podcast, and the guy literally said, how can I get how can I get your products into this state? I love everything you're doing. I've been following you for a while. How do I get your products? Right. And that goes into the whole influencer, or whatever you want to call it, side of things. But for the most part, the brand speaks for itself. I just do a little bit of extra pushing sometimes, and people love it and they really resonate with it. So Massachusetts is still very much a plenty of opportunity there for us to continue to expand and to introduce new SKUs and stuff like that. However, on the hemp side, right, the federally legal side, we have the ability to go into Texas because Texas allows low dosed beverages and edibles and stuff like that in their market because it's regulated through the hemp rules. And so through the hemp rules, we have a 5 milligram beverage that's identical, a 5 milligram THC beverage, 1 milligram CBD beverage. And I can get into the ratios and why that matters. But the Texas market is an opportunity around, and it's the identical product basically you can find in Massachusetts, but it's going to be in a can and it's going to be in Texas. It's about accessibility is the big issue, right? Accessibility means like the world to Lotus because that's the whole idea of like if it's in a bar, if it's in a restaurant, if it's in a grocery store, if it's in a beer store, next to the craft beer, and it's low dose, meaning like 5 milligrams or so of THC, it should be just available for adults, 21 plus, right? Just like beer should be available, right? And so those are the rules that we're playing under. And the reason why that is so important right now is because this only just recently started becoming a thing over the last since the beginning of this year, really. Like there was some murmurs of it last year a little bit, but there's a couple of companies that have already released products into the Minnesota market, which got a lot of the press. Texas being a very large state with, we're going to be in Austin, Dallas, Houston. We're going to be in like these three major metropolitan areas where we're going to be able to be in bars, restaurants, craft beer stores, right? We're gonna be in Eskimo huts, right? We're gonna be in like the crazy, and the distributor that we're talking to right now, and the distributor we've actually signed contracts with already, is a craft beer distributor. That's how these things should be distributed. It shouldn't be behind 17 layers of security with ID checks and, mother's maiden names and, whatever else you have to divulge when you get into a dispensary. It should just be available. Like you would have to drink a lot of this stuff in order to feel the effect of, say, like smoking like an entire joint or something like that. Like we're talking about a couple milligrams versus like an entire, like, 300 milligrams of, pre-roll.
Yeah, right. And this is that thing. I love this where you look and go, okay, we have this pathway through. The market has outsized demand versus the supply that's there. We look at avenues to distribute. Oh, okay. These people already have the craft beer distributor can already get in all these shelves where our consumer is. And to your point, it's like we're all adults. Someone's 22, 23. Me, I'm 35. I want to get this like let me do it. And I'm paying tax. It's not happening I'm not going into a back alley and getting it like I did in college. And
Exactly.
it's taking it's professionalizing the whole system in the industry, right?
Yeah.
Which is I
And
think embracing that as it is inevitable. So why not, you know,
yeah,
not
and it's all compliant, right? We're using all the compliant language. We're putting all the warning signal signs on it that we are required to do, and we're producing a low dose product, right? So even, God forbid a child gets a hold of it, they might feel a little bit like weird, but they're not going to have to get rushed to the emergency room, right? If you have like a traditional edible, sometimes that can happen, where it's just like because the way your body biochemistry works, which I won't go into the details on, eventually if you take that edible, like it can turn into like a bigger problem for a lot of people because you're kind of like rolling the dice and you just don't know what's going to happen an hour from now. Whereas beverages, it's 5 minutes. And so once you drink one, you kind of know where you're at. You know what I mean? So, and again, I don't know if you know too much about the science or the technology behind all this stuff, but getting it into a beverage is easy, but making it like consistent and controllable, that's the hard part. And that's kind of been solved by us and a few other companies.
and how do you go about so getting it distributed is one thing, but how do you build exposure or just marketing in general when you look at all of the regulations around, anything cannabis related when we're talking internet advertising?
Yeah.
How are you all, I guess, like even in Massachusetts, going and running marketing? What
Yeah,
have
it's
you done?
permissible. Now, and here's the thing is like you could have talked to Facebook as little as 6 months ago, and tell you to go pound sand. But like now, they're very much like interested in what we have to say, and because it's federally legal, we just have to show them like, hey, here's who we are. It's an incorporated business. It's a legitimate operation, and we produce these three products, which are federally legal. And then all of a sudden, now you can advertise on Facebook. Now you can advertise on Instagram, right? Now you can advertise on Twitter. And even Twitter is even more. Twitter is actually probably the best platform for cannabis advertising as far as permissibility, whether it's performing or not, that's different. But when it comes to Twitter, they actually do allow some licensed cannabis companies also to advertise because that's the whole thing. Some of the changes that Elon Musk put in place. But the point being, Facebook, Instagram, and a few other spots where we have a larger audience we can get access to. If you can guarantee they're 21 plus and you can guarantee that you are a hemp based company that's federally legal, then they will take your advertising dollars all day.
Yeah, Facebook will find a way to get your money. That's
Exactly.
guaranteed. Even if it's in the short term, they say no. They will find a way to come back
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
Um,
They'll say no. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I had a $500 ad budget and it got spent that day though. Like what happened,
for real. Okay, so that's good to be able to get through. And hey, it's federally legal. We'd like to advertise. Now, the advertising still, how profitable is that? We with beverage, we just see that as a challenge, right? Beverage, like we talked about off air before, it's not cheap to get in to uh, create, distribute. Also, shipping is something that can be kind of a pain. Are you when you are advertising? Are you just like, hey, we're at these dispensaries? Is
Yeah,
that kind of the
right now we're only in the licensed cannabis market, and so our advertising is limited primarily to, social media stuff. We're not actually running specific ads right now. We're working with a few companies on doing a little bit of discovery around direct mailers, but in the Massachusetts space, it's so restrictive. And like it's just they handcuff you every way you can. But basically, you can do billboards, you can do direct mailers. Like there's stuff like that you can do. And then if you have a loyalty program, then you can obviously advertise directly to those people and give them like special loyalty discounts and stuff like that. But even discounting and couponing and stuff like that is even frowned upon in Massachusetts. So it's like there's very restricted ways of doing it. However, when we move to the Texas market, our first product should be out, we'll say, mid-July ish. Hopefully not late July, but mid-July we should have product in market, and that means in 10 stores, maybe to start with. A little bit of crawl before we walk, just to make sure we kind of understand what the market demands are up front. And at that point, we'll be having our Shopify store. This is how you can do it now with hemp. You can literally just do D2C online sales, because now, since it's a brand new category that literally didn't exist 6 months ago, we're going to be one of the pioneers here, right? We're going to be one of the companies out there that has a Shopify store, and you can now get it delivered to your door in 33, 37 states, depending on who you talk to, right? As long as it's compliant with that state, we'll be shipping to those states. So, but you're right though, shipping actually does cost a lot of money. So that's the other part of it, is that you're shipping water around, right? So we're looking at, so right now we have a Texas manufacturer and a Texas distributor. We're looking at a few other manufacturers and distributors across the country right now, and just trying to be selective, like how we want to work with them, because it would stink if I have to ship water from Texas to, say, like, you know Maine or something like that. I
Right.
have an operation in Massachusetts, but I can't do that because it's state by state in the licensed cannabis market. But in the hemp market, I can technically ship something to Maine. However, it's moving water, shipping water, which is not very cost effective. So we're looking at partners in the northern states as well, like Colorado, Minnesota, things like that.
So, on that, how much time, or and we can say, or resources, I guess, do you deploy on, hey, we need to market what we currently can do and within the, the laws of today, but also building out for the future to go, okay, we think this windfall of legislation is going to happen. And when that happens, we can't now take 6 months to have a, Shopify plan and a DTC plan in place.
Right.
How do you balance that?
They're calculated risks. Everything's a balance. So this whole hemp stuff, we've known about the hemp project. We've actually been talking to the provider since last year, October, the manufacturing partner. So like that's how long we've been actually going through this process, and we're finally getting cans on the shelf in the next like I said, like 4 or 5 weeks maybe. But when it comes to the risk, it's all about calculated risks to maximize reward, right? So if you think about people talk about like trading and stuff like that, you minimize your risk, you put your floor on your risk, and you maximize for the reward side of it too. So, but you want to have that floor for risk. So the way we approach it is primarily based on, it's kind of, I take like a gardening philosophy to a lot of this stuff. What needs the water and the nutrients today, right? Like what's actually working, what's happening, and like what needs a little bit of extra love today. I'll go sprinkle some water and some nutrients on that to be like, all right, let's push that forward, and push this forward, all with under the umbrella of Good Feels, of course, even though they're going to be two kind of separate companies for regulatory
Right.
purposes. Moving forward with Texas took a long time, but once it's established, if we ever go federally legal, even end of year in 3 years, doesn't matter. We're doing everything we can to make the market today. And that's what we are doing. That's what we've been preparing for years now, is literally just making a big enough impression on people, staying in business, trying to get to cash flow positive as quickly as possible, which we're kind of break even right now, but like we're super close to actually moving into the positive side versus break even side. And just making sure we last enough to be able to be in market when it actually does unfold. Because if whoever is going to be in market when it unfolds and has the structure and has stability and has the scale, like those are going to be the big winners, and those are going to be the next billion-dollar companies. Those are going to be the next Pepsi, right? That's the next, like, Truly, or whatever you want to call for like a hard seltzer.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? I think something you said there is so huge that a lot of people listening can benefit on, like stay in business. and making sure that you're in a position that when we know the market, we know the demand is coming, we know the legislation is going to come. Okay, we need to be in a position, having our distributors lined up, having scalability, understanding our shipping process. How do we get our cogs down in manufacturing? All of those things. And something else you really said that you said that I really like is understanding what can have fixed costs, but then can have kind of an outsized return or an infinite return on investment. Those, uh, home run swing kind of bets where I know, like, okay, worst case, it's going to cost me 5, 10, 15, 50 grand. Okay. I know it's a finite cost at a worst case, but it could return at something insane.
Yeah,
And
that's the dream. That's the
looking at,
dream. Yeah, and that's also part of the conversation we were having off camera, which is the alpha. It's just like, what is that little thing that we can invest in that's going to allow us to get, maybe on the worst case scenario, it gives us a 2x return, but in the best case scenario, it gives us a 40x return.
yeah, we had Andrew Yang's first staffer on, their head of marketing.
Nice.
And he's like, I did a 18-month plan, and all it was how do we get on Joe Rogan? Nothing mattered, nothing mattered,
That's
nothing
all.
mattered.
Focus. Yeah.
Yeah. And it all came through that they went to all like the periphery podcasts that, kind of
Mm.
like our stepping stones. And eventually what happened was Sam Harris just texted Joe Rogan and said, you should interview this guy. And then he got up, and then now he's like in the presidential, he's
Right,
up on
exactly.
stage. And
Yeah.
it was funny because he was like, all of the everything, the advertising, whatever, like didn't really matter until we got on that show.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, right, the moonshots sometimes when you actually go
So
after those
that's the
can
big
be
one.
huge.
Yeah, and that's our approach. It's like we don't know 100% what's going to work today. We're entering a brand new world, right? And there's a lot of blue water around, right? It's not like we're in a red water, shark infested water where there's just so many competitors and you're just trying to like, there's a little fish swimming, like trying to go for it, but someone else bites it. Like we're in blue water scenario, right? This doesn't happen very often, and the point being like there will be many winners here
Hmm.
because you always hear about the new celebrity tequila being bought for $600 million and stuff like that. Those things are still actually happening, right? And so from our perspective, it's really about, again, longevity, but swimming in these blue waters where we're just trying to figure out like these little tests here and there that say like, okay, what if we spent a little bit of money on some kind of viral marketing campaign or Instagram influencers or whatever it might be, and just doing, a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, just to see what's actually working. And one of the other tips that I always give people when they come to me for advice is work on one marketing platform at a time. Like you can't do everything all the time perfectly great. So if you try to go Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and XYZ social platform and you just flood it with a bunch of marketing, if you're especially a very small team, of course, like when you get that data back, how are you going to figure out what's actually working, right? And if so, for us, it's like trying to perfect one platform at a time is really our strategy. And we haven't chosen exactly which platform we're going to first. It might in fact be Twitter. At the same time, though, it's like really just making sure that the ROAS is there, right? So it's really just about ROAS for us, making sure that we can get like a 4 or 5x ROAS. Because if we can't quite get there, then you know what I mean. Like there's complications when it comes to the spend on the manufacturing, for instance, right? Because for every dollar we put in, we get $2 out right now, and that those $2 or that dollar profit, will say, how much percentage of that is going towards? Is it all going towards marketing or a little bit going towards marketing? Like we have to still figure out some of that stuff, and that's like I said, in the next 4 weeks we'll have a more solidified plan.
Yeah, that's always the battle, right? Understanding like, okay, how much gas are we putting on the fire when it comes to marketing initiatives
Yeah,
and
and
trying
they
to,
in beverage companies take a lot of fire. I mean, take a lot of fuel
yeah, yeah,
because you're building a brand new category, right? It's not like all of a sudden THC seltzers, THC drinks in general, and THC beverages did exist a little bit. There's the original, like the OGs, like the Keef Colas and stuff like that, maybe in the West Coast markets, but those weren't formulated the way the new ones are formulated. Those were more like an edible, where you drink one and then an hour later you'd feel it. You know what I mean? Whereas all this new tech came out since then, and we're one of the companies that are kind of exploited this ability to, have a faster acting, like 3 to 5 minute onset time, where you can predict it just like you predict a beer. And you're going into, since we're creating a brand new category, a lot of consumers, when they're going to be entering that liquor store in Texas, for instance, they're going to see on the shelf, it's going to be like craft beer, craft beer, craft beer. And it's going to be like THC seltzers. And be like, what's that? You know what I mean? And like, they're going to try it. Some people will definitely try them. right? And it's not about the first one; it's about the rebuy. Ultimately, you know what I mean? Like, of course, anybody's going to try something once, but we want to really focus on the rebuys, making sure that people are going to be constantly coming in, and the distributors are always going to be on top of in-store merchandising and making sure that like the stores are representing us correctly and really dialing us into each individual store to make sure we're constantly getting these rebuys. Because if if they don't buy it again, you're kind of dead in the water. And it has to taste good for that too. So there's a lot of small things that people kind of overlook. They're like, oh yeah, I can drink and get high now, but they don't realize that like if it doesn't taste good, people aren't going to buy it again.
Yeah, the product quality has to be there, and like you said, repurchase rate, and that's so huge. And we saw like I just saw today, Mr. Beast shut down Beast Burger, and a lot of celebrities, some of their stuff, it's like their brands work when it tastes good, but a
Yeah.
lot of times it's like, oh, if you're just banking on celebrity worship and a one-time purchase, that's fun,
Yeah.
but
Everybody will try something once.
yeah, right,
But then you get to the price point. So it's like, if it's a 6 pack, 4 pack, 12 pack, whatever, like whatever, what's that price point? Is it like $30 where they're just like, more than $30? That's not worth a test. But if it's like 22, I can do that. $22, I'll give that 4 pack or 6 pack a sample.
yeah,
So there's a lot of psychology when it comes to the pricing side too.
especially when you go for, I think sometimes we can lose side of the fact that sometimes consumers their first ever exposure to a brand is on a shelf when they're walking by and they have
Hmm.
no idea. They just go, it's product A, product B, price, oh, same thing, and they are making a price decision based on testing. Or
Yep,
you know
exactly.
where we can get a little romantic on like, we have a story and we've done this thing and these funnels, and it's like at the end of I was walking through the store and saw it and it looked cool. um Especially when we look at consumables, right? Like those are those things that can happen.
Same.
So
Yeah.
it's funny to see how that can, so the
Yeah.
performance of
But
that.
then you've got the other people like me who I often, since I'm a huge supporter of CPG in general, I've always wanted to have a product in my hand. And that's why I built this. This is my first actual product that I've built that, will fit it, I can hold. I'm a tech guy. I came from zeros and ones, right? So for 25 years, I was, doing all kinds of crazy programming and stuff like that. So this is my first physical product. And so I actually really, really enjoy CPG in general. But I'm the type of consumer who I will buy something that looks cool on the shelf or like hits like a certain narrative in my head, and I can connect with, then I'll buy it and then I'll put it in my cabinet and I'll never use it. Cause I'm like, it's too special. Like, I don't know how to, and it was also like $7 for a little thing. And I'm like, all right, when is it going to be that special occasion when I open it? Right. And what we're trying to do with a couple other companies is democratize THC seltzer. It shouldn't be like, and I've actually, people tell us sometimes about our products, even in the Massachusetts market. Actually, someone said this to me the other day at an expo we were at in Western Massachusetts. And they were like, yeah, I came home after a long, hard day of work and I found that I had, that pineapple mango seltzer you gave me like 6 months ago was in my fridge behind something. And I found it and it was the most delicious, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much for the nice words. But I'm also thinking to myself, you had it in your fridge for 6 months and you didn't like drink it yet.
Right.
Like, I know that personality because that's me. That's literally me. So I'm like, how do I get the person to be like, how do I democratize it in a way that's going to make people like just pick up a 6 pack, every weekend, they just pick up a 6 pack of that as opposed to Bud Light or whatever they're drinking and just try that as like the high or the intoxicant for that night. And a lot of it does come down to price because right now in the Massachusetts market, our seltzers prepare yourself for a brain shock here. Our seltzers right now go for $7 a unit on the Massachusetts market
Wow. Yeah.
because there are layers that everybody,
Everyone's
the
got it.
wholesale
Yeah.
cost is half the price of the retail cost. So they take a 50%. We take a 50% hit on that. So like we sell it to wholesale at 350. They put it on the shelves for 7. So it's like, and our costs, obviously, since we're small operations, are kind of high because we run our own manufacturing. So we have all of our labor costs, all of our COGS, like all that stuff. When you add it all in, we're making money. We've got a pretty healthy profit margin on that. But at the same time, like spending $7 per unit on a 6 pack. I
Yeah.
mean, even if you get down to $6 per unit, we're at $36 for a 6 pack. Like that rubs me the wrong way. I don't want to. I want to see these things as cheap as Polar Seltzer, or what you know what I mean. Like I want to see it as
Right.
cheap as Lacroix at some point, where it's just like, or maybe not that cheap because there's no actually intoxicant in that sense. But getting our products down to like a 6 pack price of like $14 or something like that someday would be a dream.
Right, a little more comped versus a Modelo because nobody keeps a Modelo in their fridge for 6 months,
No, they
right?
just crack them open and they drink it.
Yeah, they
That's all
drink it.
they
So
crush them, right? And that's why Modelo is now the leader, right?
yep.
So that's what we're trying to do is like we're trying to do this at scale. We're trying to make this democratized in that sense where we're just getting out to as many people as possible to try these things because we're making the market. And I don't necessarily want to spend $100,000 a month in marketing to support all of this. And other companies are spending good amounts of money in marketing, but we're the small startup. We're the challenger brand, right? We're like the go-getters. We're going to be trying to find all those little pieces of alpha when they add up to something bigger where we're just going to be able to exploit like these little rules that maybe the big guys can't because they're too cautious, right? Or they're too, they don't want to have that perception on their brand or something like that where like, maybe we'll take that little extra risk. And eventually when we get down to that, $2 a bottle or $2 a can price point, I will celebrate. That'll be a huge milestone because I want it to be everywhere. I alcohol like I'm not gonna go on the rant right now, but I'll preface it with there has been zero studies that have ever shown that alcohol on its own, whether polyphenols in wine or whatever else, excluding all that stuff, but there's literally zero tolerance for alcohol for your body. You're literally poisoning yourself, right? So it's like, and I gave up alcohol like about 2 years ago now. But before that, I mean, I'm a huge craft beer person. That was my jam, right? When the IPAs and all the stuff were coming out years and years ago, that was huge, right? I was, when we were doing triples, doubles, and triples and stuff like that back in the day in Brooklyn, like those were my jam. Like I would always go in there to this really great bar called Burp Castle when I used to live in the East Village. And Rachel would serve me up like, some Duvel or some like really strong like beers. And I would gobble them up because they were so like different and interesting and nuanced. Whereas now I look at it and being like, hey, those were fun times, those are great, but there's no amount of alcohol that's actually healthy for you in a
Right.
sense. Whereas cannabis has all these benefits, zero hangover on top of it, that you're just like, why wouldn't I just go full whole hog, like full on in with cannabis at this point?
Yeah, leaning into it. That makes sense. Um, my last question for you, which is, you said you came from tech, and one of the things, and I'm loving CPG, but one of the things that I'm always interested in is in tech, you can iterate so quickly, you can change a product quickly, you can get stuff, from dev to launch super fast. How have you maybe not battled that or like dealt with that of like want to make a change to the product or something, but it's like, oh, this is iteration doesn't come nearly as quickly when you have production line, right? So how has that been like a mental shift for you or anything where you've had to be like, oh, okay, I need to slow down, or has it
A bit.
been, yeah, how do you
Yeah,
balance that?
I am that in that camp of move fast and break things. Like that was my motto. Like for the majority of my tech career before it was even coined. I was constantly I was that, and I said this to another person the other day, and I was just like I was kind of slightly embarrassed when I said it, but I'm going to say it again for your edification. But I was that guy. Right. I was that 10x programmer. So like I would crush code all the time, just destroy code. Like I would blow through so many mounts of code and just get everything done as quick as possible. And the way my brain worked was I would run through all the use cases in my head rapidly as I could. And then I'd find every little edge cases I could in that little bit of time that I had to work on this code. And I'd program and make sure it was all flawless. And most of my code came back fairly flawless. And I instilled it upon all of the people I mentored when it came to programming to make sure that like they could kind of replicate a lot of this stuff. But in the tech world is very much different than CPG, like you already mentioned. Whereas that's the way my brain works, and so I've had to pull back a little bit on that because I know my team also who are in the cannabis world themselves, and some of our team members have been in the cannabis world for over like 7 years or so, whereas I'm fairly new in a sense compared to them. I get my kicks from R&D now. So we'll throw together tons and tons of different I'll just have an idea and I'll just type it up real quick and be like, hey, I think we should try something like this. And the R&D team will just pop into the lab, 3 days later and be like, hey, Jason had an idea for this. Let's put this together. And we've created all kinds of stuff that we have no intentions of ever releasing, but it nurtures my soul to create those things because now I have better medicine for my mom or other family members who have now I supply medicine for, or even just people randomly who've reached out to me and I've sent them medicine, random people that like that I've met online, and they're like, "Hey, I've got this issue. I've got really bad, my teeth hurt or something like that. Like I'm going through some really jaw pain, and because they know I went through a lot of jaw pain myself. Like, can you help me with that?" And I've sent samples of minor cannabinoid mixes and all kinds of fun stuff to people because it's just effective. It's effective medicine. And so, even though I'm not in the medical market, I personally will just keep on creating R&D stuff. Whether this company exists or not, I'm going to continue to create more cannabinoid-based products because it's a huge passion of mine today.
That makes sense. You believe in it, and it's also one of those things when you go to create those products, they can just lead you to better questions every time, right?
Yeah,
That's
it's discovery. That's what it is. And it's like you run the experiment, you fail, and then you stick it in the back of your head like, "Oh, that's what it was." And then you learn, right? And that's the whole. And I did borrow that from tech, definitely. It's fail fast. Like when something doesn't work right away, and you try to figure out as quick as possible if it's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, then you move on to the next thing. You learned, you figured it out, you failed it, and then you moved on to the next thing. So
1,000.
that's a big one.
I love it. Jason, thank you so much for coming on today. Let people know where they can connect with you online and follow the journey, and then also where they can follow along with Good Feels.
Sure. So for me personally, I'm on LinkedIn notoriously, infamously on LinkedIn. I've definitely stirred the pot a few times where people were very much angry with me. But for the most part, it's been mostly cordial. So that's just Jason Reposa. So if you just search up Jason Reposa, that'll get you to my LinkedIn. If you just Google my name, there's a few like other things out there around me. And then I'm on Instagram at Jason Reposa, Facebook at Jason Reposa, et cetera, et cetera. So all my socials should be at Jason Reposa. And then the Goodfeels side, we have getgoodfeels.com, and our socials are getgoodfeels. So GET, Goodfeels.
Awesome. We will link to both of those or all of those in the show notes. Jason, thanks again for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan, for having me. It's been fun.
All right, everybody. That's it for this episode. As always, hit that like, share, comment, all those good buttons at the bottom of your app. I'm your host, Jordan Shelton, and I'll catch you next time.